Hello there. Welcome to the Sleep Science Galaxy channel. Tonight, you don't need to understand anything. You don't need to remember anything. And you don't need to try to fall asleep. Just be here. In this very moment, allow the outside world to slow down, as if the entire universe has gently lowered its rotation, pausing, just long enough for you to rest. Take a soft breath in and let it flow out, slow and easy. With every breath, you take a step back from tension, away from restless thoughts that haven't yet settled. The gentle music opens a safe space, a place where you are allowed to let go of control. Tonight, we will listen together to the most relaxing truths about the stars. Not to learn, but to drift. Stars that have existed for billions of years are still whispering in the darkness, telling stories slower than time itself. This is the doorway into sleep, and you are already standing right at its threshold. The grandeur of the stars. As awareness begins to settle, as the breath is no longer as hurried as it was at first, the human mind naturally reaches for anchors larger than itself. And there is no anchor more vast, more unhurried, more generous than the stars. In this moment, we no longer look at the sky as a scientific map, but as a silent ocean, where each star is a wave of light that set out on its journey long before we were ever born. There are stars not only larger than our sun, but so immense that all familiar measurements lose their meaning. If placed at the center of the solar system, Earth's orbit would vanish like a small line gently erased. Even the path of Jupiter, with its vast sweep, would become a faint detail buried deep within the pulsing layers of hot gas surrounding these colossal suns. They are not solid spheres, but oceans of fire and plasma, swelling, contracting, exhaling clouds of matter that drift slowly into space like smoke after a long dream. When the human mind tries to grasp such scale, it often pauses. Not because of a lack of intelligence, but because the universe has moved far beyond the language and intuition evolution has given us. And it is precisely this moment of being unable to imagine that brings a strange kind of relaxation. When the mind can no longer control or measure, it is forced to let go. Awe stops being tension and becomes a wide blanket, gently covering the small, scattered thoughts of everyday life. These giant stars do not exist in silence. They shine with a power beyond imagination, so intense that the light from a single one can rival the combined glow of billions of others. In the deep universe, there are points of light that, from far enough away, are indistinguishable from entire galaxies. They burn brightly not because they wish to be seen, but because it is the only way they can exist, consuming themselves to remain balanced against the immense weight of their own gravity. Here, light no longer carries its familiar romantic meaning. It is not merely illumination, but the sign of a quiet struggle between gravity and energy. Every passing second, these stars consume fuel at a rate that makes their lifespans shockingly short. Compared to our gentle sun, which lives for billions of years like a steady lamp, these giants are like fierce flames in the night, brighter, hotter, and yet fragile in their own way. As we listen to their story, we begin to sense our own smallness, not as something negative, but as a form of release. The worries, plans, and pressures that fill the daytime mind suddenly feel weightless. For if there are stars large enough to swallow entire planetary systems, bright enough to outshine billions of suns, then our thoughts, however important they may be in personal life, are only tiny ripples in that vast current. And it is this sense of smallness that brings deep comfort. when we are no longer the center of everything. We are freed from the heavy responsibility of controlling every outcome. The universe was in motion for billions of years before we arrived, and it will continue for billions of years after we leave. Those giant stars were born, grew, shone, and slowly moved toward their own endings without needing human attention or concern. Realizing this, the mind is allowed to rest. In this quiet space, the brain begins to grow tired in a gentle way. Not tired from overload, but tired from reaching its limit. When there is nothing left to analyze, the mind drifts, like watching waves repeat themselves or listening to steady rain on a rooftop. Images of colossal stars soften and blur, no longer sharp, dissolving into a feeling of openness and slowness. Perhaps this is why contemplating the grandeur of the universe so easily leads us toward sleep. Not because it is boring, but because it is too vast to hold on to. When the mind cannot cling, it naturally relaxes, and in that relaxation, the heartbeat slows, the breath deepens, and the body releases its vigilance. There is no need to resist the darkness here, because this darkness is not a threat, but a wide space where light passed long ago. The supergiant stars, with sizes that consume worlds and light that crosses galactic boundaries, quietly become guides for human sleep. They do not lull us with words, but with scale, not with closeness, but with distance. It is this absolute remoteness that allows personal tension to dissolve, like a drop of ink dispersing into the ocean. And as awareness drifts even farther, as the stars become only a vague sensation of vastness, we realize that there is nowhere we need to go. We only need to remain still, letting the universe continue its story, while we are allowed to rest within it. In a place where stars too large to imagine are igniting and fading away, the sleep of one small human becomes something entirely natural, gentle, effortless, and accepted. Extreme remnants, neutron stars, pulsars, magnetars. As the light of giant stars slowly recedes from the mind, as their overwhelming grandeur has completed its task of making us feel small, the universe does not end its story there. It does not only know how to expand, to swell, and to blaze. After burning everything that can be burned, after giving away its most powerful light, some stars move into another chapter, quieter, denser, and more extreme than anything the human imagination has ever touched. If the giants before invited us to let go because they were too vast, these remnants invite us to let go because they are too dense, too fast, too powerful, so intense that there is nothing left to hold on to. When a massive star ends its life in an explosion, the remaining core does not disappear. Instead, it collapses. It keeps collapsing. It collapses until every empty space between particles is erased. Atoms that were once familiar are crushed. The boundaries between their components dissolve, and matter enters a state that exists nowhere on Earth. The stellar core becomes impossibly small, yet terrifyingly heavy. The entire mass of a sun is forced into a space only a few dozen kilometers wide. If earlier the universe taught us about vastness, now it teaches us about absolute density. In that place, gravity is no longer a familiar idea. It is strong enough to bend time itself, to make light struggle just to escape. The surface of this object is no longer gas or fire, but a strange kind of ground. Solid, cold, and unimaginable. Simply thinking that a single spoonful of matter from here could weigh more than mountains on Earth is enough to slow the mind. Not from fear, but because the brain no longer knows how to process such a sensation. And when it cannot process, it stops trying. Some of these stellar cores do not remain still. They spin, not in a way we recognize, but so fast that the concept of fast begins to blur. Hundreds of rotations per second. There are objects out there that complete a full spin faster than a human blink. In that motion, they emit steady pulses, like the ticking of an enormous cosmic clock. From very far away, on a small planet, humans detected these signals and once wondered if they were greetings from some distant intelligence. But no, it was simply the patient rotation of a dead star continuing to exist in its own way. These pulses are astonishingly regular, more precise than atomic clocks. In a universe full of chaos, where everything is born and fades away, such steady signals feel like a quiet reassurance. Not everything is random. Some laws remain firm even when pushed to the very edge of existence. And this regularity, when listened to long enough, has a curious effect on the human mind. It resembles slow breathing, like the rhythmic waves along a shoreline, gently synchronizing the brain and allowing it to drift into deeper rest. But the universe still does not stop there. Among the most extreme remnants are objects that carry power so immense that even the laws of physics seem to tremble. Their magnetic fields are so strong that if a human could stand nearby, an entirely impossible assumption, the atomic structure of the body would be torn apart by mere presence alone. Here, magnetism is no longer an invisible force, but a storm capable of ripping matter at its deepest level. Bursts of energy from these objects release, in an instant, as much energy as a gentle star like the sun would need hundreds of thousands of years to produce. At first, these may sound like violent images. Yet when placed at cosmic distance, told in a slow and unhurried voice, they take on a strangely quiet quality. Because all these extremes unfold far away, long ago, and require nothing from us. We do not need to make these objects slow down. We do not need to fully understand them for them to continue existing. They simply remain there, obeying the deep laws of the universe, as if no one were watching. And here, something important happens in the mind. Humans are often tired not because the world is too complex, but because of the feeling that they must understand, must grasp, must control. Before these stellar remnants, full understanding is impossible. And when that becomes clear, the mind is granted a rare privilege, the right not to understand. No need to conclude, no need to remember, only to listen and let the images pass like slow clouds across the night sky. The universe, in its most extreme states, does not demand tense attention. Instead, it invites deep humility. Before objects smaller than cities, yet heavier than the sun, spinning faster than any machine humanity has ever built, and carrying power beyond all lived experience, there is nothing left to do but accept our own limits. And within that acceptance, a quiet peace spreads. The steady rotation continues. Magnetic fields keep bending space. Gravity holds matter tightly in its strange form. There is no noise, no audience, only the persistent operation of laws written at the very dawn of the universe. When we allow ourselves to step outside the need to understand, to react, to name, these stories stop being information. They become background rhythm, like distant wind, like the slow current of a river at night. And then, quite naturally, a gentle tiredness appears. Not tiredness from thinking too much, but tiredness from reaching the edge of thought itself. At that edge, there are no new questions left to ask, only a sense of vastness, distance, and safety. extreme remnants of stars, in their own way, have fulfilled their role, reminding us that the universe does not need humans to stay awake in order to exist. It has operated, it is operating, and it will continue, whether we sleep or not. And within that truth, sleep is no longer a task to achieve. It is simply the natural response of a small being placed within a universe so vast that there is nothing left to resist. As those distant rotations continue steadily in the darkness, we can allow ourselves to drift along, gently, without needing to understand everything, without needing to hold on to anything, resting within the very human limits that make rest possible. Motion and deformation of stars. As the extreme remnants of stars slowly fade into the distance of the mind, after their super-fast rotations and invisible forces powerful enough to tear atoms apart have completed their role of helping us release the need to understand, the universe softens its voice. It no longer speaks through overwhelming extremes, but through slower, subtler movements, closer to the rhythm of life itself. After showing that it can compress matter beyond imagination, the universe returns to tell a more familiar story. The story of transformation, of shapes that are never fixed, of how even light cannot always keep its original, perfect form. We often imagine stars as perfectly round spheres, balanced and symmetrical, suspended in space like symbols of order. But when we look more closely, when we listen more carefully, that image begins to dissolve. Some stars rotate so rapidly that their own motion stretches their bodies. The equator swells outward, the poles are pressed inward, and the shape is no longer an ideal circle, but a flattened form pulled tight by speed. Nothing has gone wrong here. Physics is simply doing what it does, and light is accepting the shape that motion demands. If we gaze at this image long enough, it reveals a very unusual beauty. Not the beauty of static perfection, but the beauty of honesty. The star does not try to remain round to meet anyone's expectations. It simply spins, allowing the consequences of that motion to imprint themselves onto its very form. No hiding, no correction, no hesitation. Motion leaves a trace, and that trace becomes identity. Elsewhere in the universe, there are stars so large that they cannot hold on to everything they contain. Light and energy pour outward, not only to illuminate, but to carry matter with them, layer by layer, lifting it from the stellar surface and releasing it into space. Stellar winds blow continuously, gentle yet persistent, sweeping gas and dust into soft, drifting clouds. The star does not explode, nor does it collapse all at once. It simply becomes lighter, slowly, like a single long breath stretched across thousands, even millions of years. In this moment, the star is no longer a symbol of absolute stability. It resembles a living process, existing, losing, and continuing all at once. There is no clear boundary between what still is and what is already leaving. Matter that once belonged to the star becomes part of the surrounding space, perhaps wandering for a long time before joining another story, in another place, in another form. This instability is not a sign of failure. It is the natural consequence of scale. When something is too large, too bright, too rich in energy, keeping everything exactly where it began becomes impossible. Internal pressure, gravity, rotation, and continuous flows of energy collide and negotiate with one another in every moment. The star lives in a state of dynamic balance, a balance that exists only because motion never stops. If we listen to this story with a mind that is gradually growing tired, something unexpectedly familiar appears. Not only stars have imperfect shapes. Not only light must trade something away to continue existing. Everything in the universe, from the largest to the smallest, is in process. Nothing ever truly stands still. There are only changes that happen so slowly we grow used to calling them stable. When told in the slow rhythm of the universe, this truth brings deep comfort. For if even enormous fires hanging in space do not need to be perfect, do not need to maintain an ideal shape, then human beings, small, fragile, and brief, do not need to carry that burden either. The deviation from the circle, the gradual loss, the subtle trembling within balance, none of these means something is wrong. They simply mean that movement is happening. In this state, the mind begins to soften. Invisible demands to be stable, to be certain, to hold oneself in a fixed form suddenly feel out of place. If stars can swell, flatten, radiate, and lose parts of themselves, yet still continue to shine in their own way, then perhaps change in human life does not need to be resisted so fiercely. The story of these changing forms does not need a climax. It does not need a conclusion. It only needs to be listened to long enough for the listener's heartbeat to slow, for the brain to stop searching for something solid to cling to. Instability, when placed in a cosmic context, is no longer frightening. It becomes background music, a slow, steady, non-threatening melody, reminding us that everything is flowing exactly as it should. And when we allow ourselves to drift with that rhythm, without holding shape, without holding roles, without holding control, the body begins to relax. Shoulders lighten, breath deepens, thoughts lose their sharp edges. The immense motions out there, the slow deformations of light and matter, quietly become a wordless lullaby for a tired mind. Far away, stars continue to spin, to swell, to release parts of themselves into the dark. They do not stop to mourn what is lost, nor do they rush to compensate. They simply continue. And within that continuation, we are allowed to do the same. To continue by resting, by letting go, by allowing ourselves to be imperfect, unfixed, and not strong in every moment. As images of deforming stars slowly fade from awareness, what remains is not knowledge, but feeling. The feeling that motion is natural, that change is normal. And in a universe that is always transforming, closing one's eyes and drifting into sleep is not an escape. It is an attunement to the ancient current that has carried everything from the very beginning. Stars and black holes, a gentle destruction, when the changing shapes of stars have been accepted as a natural part of the universe. When we have grown familiar with the idea that nothing can keep its original form forever, the story continues drifting toward a deeper, quieter place. After motion comes dissolution. After deformation comes complete release. And at that boundary, where light meets the deepest darkness, the universe tells one of its quietest stories, the story of an ending without noise. There are stars that wander too close to a region of space where gravity has won absolutely. There is no need for explosions, no need for collisions. Distance alone is enough, and the difference in gravitational pull quietly begins its work. The side closer is held more tightly than the side farther away. The star does not immediately realize what is happening. It still burns, still spins, still shines as before. But within it, stretching has silently begun, like a thread pulled from both ends without the sound of tearing. As the pull grows stronger, light can no longer maintain its familiar structure. The star is drawn out, thinned, stretched into a quiet ribbon of glowing matter that curves gently around the darkness. There is no struggle, no panic, only physics working with precision and patience. Everything unfolds according to law, so slowly that without delicate instruments, one might never notice that this is a moment of life and death. What was once a radiant sphere now becomes a flow. It twists, spirals around an unseen center, heating as it is forced into ever-narrowing paths. And in this process, light flares. Not the light of new life, but the light of transformation. Energy is released as matter lets go of its old shape, as familiar structures are dismantled into more fundamental motions. From far away, human instruments detect a sudden brightness appearing at the heart of a galaxy. It flares, stands out against the background of stars, then slowly fades. It does not last long. It does not repeat. A brief signal that somewhere, a star has completed its journey. No longer existing as it once did, yet not entirely gone. It has simply changed the way it exists. Strangely, when seen from cosmic distance and told in a slow rhythm, this moment carries no sense of horror. There's no blood, no scream, no urgency. Only a stream of matter following gravity's pull, a light that appears and dissolves into darkness. Death, in this context, is not a sudden ending, but a process, a rearrangement. The universe does not use the word tragedy. It does not divide life and death the way humans do. For it, there is only movement from one form to another, from one structure to the next. A star that once hosted nuclear reactions becomes a ring of hot matter, then drifting particles, then energy spreading through space. There is no absolute loss, only a change of position and form. Listening to this story with a mind that has already softened, we begin to see that what humans fear is not the ending itself, but haste. Yet here, nothing is rushed. Everything unfolds at the pace of gravity, of orbit, of cosmic time. The star is not robbed of existence. It is guided into another state where its light can still be seen, if only briefly. That light, flaring and fading, does not resemble a flame being extinguished. It is more like a final breath, deep and slow, dissolving into space like morning mist. And it is precisely this gentleness that changes how we perceive endings. If even the most intense events in the universe can unfold in silence, then perhaps death, at its deepest level, is not an enemy. In that moment, the mind stops resisting. It no longer needs to avoid, no longer needs to raise questions to delay what comes next. The story of a star being stretched and dispersed does not demand that we understand every equation. It simply invites us to observe and let go, to release rigid ideas of beginnings and endings, to release the need to label every movement. The silence of darkness does not swallow light. It receives it, transforms it, and allows it to continue its journey in another way. In that receiving, there is no judgment, no victory or defeat, only gravity performing its role within the endless symphony of the universe. When this story reaches the human mind at night, when the body is tired and awareness is softened, it carries a very gentle message that endings do not need to be violent, that dissolution does not mean disappearance, that letting go is sometimes the most graceful form of motion. The star is no longer there as it once was, but its light has already traveled far. And even when that light fades, what it once was continues to exist, merging into space, entering stories we have never heard. In the universe, there is no absolute stopping point, only transitions where old forms dissolve to make room for something wider. And within this truth, humans are allowed to relax. If a star can leave behind its familiar shape without panic, then a tired mind can also leave wakefulness without fear. Sleep, at this point, is nothing more than a gentle phase change, the light of consciousness flaring once more at the end of the day, then settling, giving way to the safe darkness of rest. Somewhere far away, a stream of matter continues to spiral around the dark. Here, in a quiet room, breathing slows. These two motions, though vastly different in scale, share the same rhythm, the rhythm of letting go. And within that rhythm, there is nothing to fear, only the soft continuation of the universe and of ourselves. Collisions, gravitational waves, and the metals of life. When the final light of a star has dissolved into deep darkness, when that gentle act of letting go has been accepted as a natural breath of the universe, the story does not end. There is no absolute stopping point in space. What leaves its old form continues to drift, continues to respond to gravity, continues to be called by invisible bonds. And sometimes, in the silence stretching across millions of years, two remnants of dead suns find one another, not through will, not through romantic destiny, but simply because patient gravity has been guiding them for a very long time. Two ultra-dense stellar cores, small enough to fit within a city, yet heavier than the sun, orbit each other like fractures in space itself. They do not emit gentle light. They do not need to be seen. Their presence is marked by subtle distortions in the very fabric of the universe. With each orbit, each slow approach, the surrounding space trembles ever so slightly, like the surface of water when a pebble falls in. Except here, the pebble is the mass of stars, and the water is space-time itself. Those ripples travel outward. They carry no images, no colors, no sound in any human sense. They are simply stretches and compressions of the universe, moving away at the speed of light, passing through regions that seem perfectly still. Billions of years later, on a small planet, instruments delicate enough finally notice that space has gently breathed. An ancient breath, born from a violent yet silent meeting of two stellar corpses. As the distance between them can no longer sustain balance, motion accelerates. The two masses spin faster, draw closer, until rotation is no longer possible. And then, without hesitation, they collide. Not an instant explosion, but a brutal merging, where matter is crushed, compressed, heated into states never found in ordinary stars. Here, atomic nuclei are forced past familiar barriers, combining along rare pathways, forming heavy elements the universe cannot easily create in normal stellar fires. In that moment, an intense flash of light erupts. Brief, but bright enough to mark the event on the cosmic map. And with that light, new matter is born. Not life itself, but the foundation of life. Heavy, rare, stable atoms capable of resisting time. Gold, platinum, and the metals humans have long considered precious do not arise from calm stillness, but from extreme encounters like this. Told slowly, this does not feel violent in the way we usually imagine the word collision. There are no winners and losers, no meaningless destruction, only energy being transformed, matter rearranged, and new structures emerging from harsh conditions. The universe does not avoid large-scale conflict. It uses it as a rare tool to create diversity. Listening more deeply, a truth both strange and familiar emerges. The materials humans cherish, store, and exchange as symbols of value and permanence all originate from unimaginable intensity. They were once matter crushed, heated, driven to its limits. And precisely because they passed through those extremes, they endure in a universe that is always changing. In the soft light of night, when this story reaches a tired mind, it does not provoke tension. Instead, it brings deep comfort That beauty does not have to be born from peace alone. That value does not always come from gentleness. Sometimes, the greatest upheavals in the universe leave behind the most lasting traces. The ripples in space-time continue to travel long after the light has faded. They carry the message that somewhere, the universe adjusted itself, creating something new from an unavoidable encounter. And whether humans notice or not, those ripples still pass through everything in their path, including the body lying still in the darkness of this room. On a human scale, collision is often tied to injury. But from far enough away, across billions of years, collision becomes part of creation. Not because it is pleasant, but because it is necessary. The universe does not evolve through stability alone. It requires moments of imbalance to open new possibilities. Strangely, when we allow ourselves to see this without judgment, without rushing to apply it to our own lives, the body begins to relax. The mind no longer has to resist the idea that everything must be gentle to be meaningful. The heart rate slows with the realization that even what is born from intensity can become a foundation for beauty and endurance. Those heavy atoms, once created, do not remain at the site of collision. They are flung into space, drifting through clouds of gas, joining new generations of stars and planets. Billions of years later, on a distant world, they may become part of rock, of water, of living bodies. They carry the memory of ancient collisions, but not the violence, only the stability they earned. When this story is heard at the edge of sleep, it does not ask the listener to think further. It only needs to be felt as a long wave, a wave that says, the universe wastes no motion. Everything, even the most violent collisions, is woven into a larger pattern where life and material value can emerge. And with that awareness, the small disturbances of a long day grow lighter. If precious metals were born from the harshest moments of the universe, then the rough experiences of human life are not necessarily meaningless. They may simply be in a phase of transformation whose outcome has not yet appeared. Somewhere far away, two stellar remnants have become one. Their gravitational waves are still quietly moving through space. And here, in the slow rhythm of nighttime breathing, the body is allowed to rest, carrying a gentle sense that even in collision, the universe is still doing its work, creating things that endure silently and beautifully in its own way. Wandering stars. As the echoes of ancient collisions continue to ripple through space, as newly formed heavy atoms begin their long drifting journeys, the universe opens into yet another rhythm, quieter, sparser. After light flares and fades, after vibrations that bend space-time itself, there remain motions that stretch on without clear purpose. Not everything born from collision finds a place to anchor. Some stars, after the great upheavals of a galaxy, no longer belong to any familiar orbit. They are pushed away from what once was home. Not by mistake and not by choice, simply because in violent encounters between enormous masses, orbits are bent, gravity shifts direction, and a few stars receive a push strong enough to send them away from everything. There is no farewell sound, no special sign to mark the moment, only an instant when speed crosses the threshold of binding. And from that point on, the journey has no return. From far away, if they can still be seen, they shine like any other star. There is no visible scar in their light to show that they have been expelled from a galaxy. But within their story, everything has changed. No more familiar spirals of billions of stars turning around a shared center. No dense gas clouds, no nearby clusters, no collective rhythm. Ahead of them lies a void so vast that even imagination struggles to place its edges. This voyage has no destination, no promised place, only motion sustained by inertia, stretching across millions, even billions of years, through dark regions where light rarely reaches. If planets once circled these stars, those worlds are carried along as well, bringing their own skies into a long night without a galaxy as a backdrop. A solitary sun, a solitary planetary system, drifting through the black sea of intergalactic space. Told too quickly, this idea could easily feel tragic. But when placed within the slow breath of the universe, it takes on a different tone. There is no suffering in this movement, no sense of abandonment in the way humans often attach to loneliness. The star does not know it has left home. It has no memory for comparison, no desire to mourn. It simply continues to burn fuel, to shine, to exist according to its nature. The solitude here is not a lack, but an independence. In that immense emptiness, nothing pulls the star closer, but nothing forces it to change direction either. It carries its entire story with it, yet has no need to tell it to anyone. Its light spreads in all directions, even knowing it may never reach another eye. And in the universe, that is not a tragedy. It is simply another state of being. When the human mind listens to this story at night, when the noise of the day has faded, that solitude loses its sharpness. It becomes wide and soft, not like loneliness inside a closed room, but like the stillness of a field beneath a star-filled sky, no one nearby, yet nothing threatening. Only open space and extended time. There is something deeply comforting in knowing that even when separated from all familiar structures, a star never stops shining. It does not need an audience to exist. It does not need to be anchored to a larger system to have meaning. Its light does not depend on being seen. It is simply the natural result of deep internal processes, continuing until fuel gradually runs out. Through these wandering stars, the universe seems to whisper something very gently. That not belonging anywhere does not mean losing value. That solitary motion is not necessarily being lost. Sometimes it is simply another orbit, rarer, quieter, but still completely valid within the larger picture. From far enough away, the galaxy becomes a dim, fading point behind. Ahead lies darkness, but not empty darkness. It is filled with sparse particles, ancient photons, faint tremors of space-time. The star moves through it like a small boat on a night ocean, unhurried, unresisting, not searching for shore. When this story reaches a tired body, it does not awaken sadness. Instead, it eases the pressure to always belong, to always be in the right place, to always be surrounded. If in this vast universe there is room for solitary suns drifting for billions of years without explanation, then perhaps humans need not fear moments of being alone. Solitude, when placed in a cosmic context, is no longer absence. It becomes space for rest, a space without expectation, without collision, without noise. Only the slow burning rhythm of a star and the slowing breath of a listener. Somewhere far away, those stars continue to drift. They do not know they are symbols of anything. Yet, in this moment, as eyelids grow heavy and awareness begins to fade, the image of a lone sun in endless space becomes a gentle lullaby. It promises nothing, explains nothing, only quietly says, it is still possible to continue, still possible to shine, even when no one is nearby. And in that feeling, solitude is no longer frightening. It becomes a deep stillness where the mind is allowed to rest without defense, like a wandering star. There's no need to find a direction right now, only to drift, slowly, within a universe wide enough to hold every orbit, even the most solitary ones. The first stars and the final death. As the image of solitary suns slowly drifts away into the darkness between galaxies, as the idea of loneliness softens and widens like a windless night sky, the universe gently turns its story along another axis. It no longer speaks of distance in space. It begins to whisper about distance in time, a depth so vast that every familiar human measure falls apart. Here, it is no longer about where things go, but about where they once began and where they will end, far, far in the future. If we step back far enough, not only in space, but into the universe's own memory, there was a time of near absolute darkness. No planets yet, no heavy elements, no complex structures, only primordial clouds of gas, drifting quietly in a universe still very young. And then, from that simplicity, the very first stars were born. They were unlike any stars we know today, enormous, blisteringly hot, and short-lived. They ignited like the first torches in a primordial night, introducing the very idea of light where none had existed before. These stars contained no metals, no chemical diversity. They lived fast, burned fiercely, and ended in colossal explosions. Yet within that brief existence, they changed the universe forever. They forged the first elements heavier than hydrogen and helium, scattering seeds that billions of years later would become planets, oceans, and life itself. Not a single one of those stars still exists, but their trace does. It lives on in the chemical makeup of everything we know, like a deep memory written into matter. The universe, slow and patient, has moved from that fiery beginning toward a completely different future. If the first stars were like a thunderous opening drumbeat, then the end of stars like our sun resembles a long, drawn-out sigh. When gentle suns reach the end of their journeys, they do not explode. They quietly release their outer layers, leaving behind a small, hot, dense core, a remnant no longer burning through nuclear reactions, but merely holding on to the warmth of the past. These remnants drift through space like glowing embers, faintly shining, cooling over billions of years. There is no clear moment of transition, no bell announcing the end. Only temperature dropping imperceptibly slowly, light fading until it is almost indistinguishable from the universe's dark background. And then, in a future so distant it barely has a name, they will become cold objects that emit no light at all. Stars fully dead, with no outward sign of what they once were. Strangely, our universe is still too young to witness that moment. The time required for a stellar remnant to cool completely exceeds the current age of the universe, which means that throughout all cosmic history so far, no star has yet completed this final journey. That ultimate death still lies ahead, in a future no living being today could ever reach. When this thought passes through the mind at night, it does not create anxiety. Instead, it stretches the sense of time until the familiar milestones of human life grow very light. A day, a year, a lifetime suddenly lose their urgency. Compared to the journeys of stars, every pressure to hurry, to finish, to arrive in time dissolves like morning mist in sunlight. Time, in this story, is no longer a force that pushes. It becomes a deep ocean, where everything moves so slowly it nearly stands still. The mind, faced with such length, begins to grow tired in a gentle way, not from thinking too much, but because there is no room left for haste. Familiar questions like when, how soon, or will it be in time, quietly lose their meaning. At this point, awareness starts to blur. Not because the story lacks interest, but because it has moved beyond anything that needs controlling. The brain, accustomed to short spans of time, releases its grip in the face of such infinity. It cannot track every moment, every century, every millennium. And when it cannot track, it chooses to rest. Images of the first stars and of deaths that have not yet occurred weave together into a vast circle. Brilliant beginnings and silent endings. Between them lie billions of years of light, motion, collision, and transformation. The universe does not rush from start to finish. It stretches the journey slowly enough for everything to have time to become what it is. In this context, human sleep is no interruption at all. It is merely a very small pause within a timeline already accustomed to waiting. If the universe can patiently wait trillions of years for a stellar remnant to cool completely, then a mind needing a few hours to let go is nothing unusual. The first stars completed their role long ago. The final deaths still lie far ahead, distant enough to cause no concern. Between those 2 points, the universe exists in a middle age, old enough to remember, not yet old enough to close. And we, in this moment, are resting quietly within that space between. As this story slowly settles in the mind, what remains is not information, but feeling. A sense that time does not need to be grasped. A sense that everything has its own rhythm, far longer than human life. And within that awareness, eyelids grow heavy, thoughts thin out, as if the mind has aligned itself with the universe's pace. Somewhere, far in the future, stellar remnants will cool completely. Somewhere, far in the past, the first stars ignited and faded away. And here, in this very small present moment, there's only a slow breath, a body allowed to rest, and a mind drifting into sleep, held by the feeling that time is vast, patient, and never in a hurry. The far future of the universe. As awareness has drifted past fiery beginnings and endings that have not yet occurred, as the mind grows accustomed to time no longer being measured in days and months, but in vast expanses difficult to name, the story naturally moves into an even more distant realm. No longer focused on the fate of individual stars, the universe begins to whisper about its own destiny. Not urgently, not dramatically, just a long, unhurried gaze toward what lies ahead, where light grows sparse and all motion slows, like a piece of music approaching its final notes. In this vision, the universe does not collapse, does not scream, does not erupt in one last blaze. It simply continues to expand. Distances between galaxies grow ever larger, and light must travel farther, longer, to reach anything else. Stars gradually exhaust their fuel. Nuclear furnaces that once burned brightly fall silent. Not all at once, not in a single memorable moment, but scattered and drawn out, like the lights of a vast city slowly switching off as the night grows very late. The sky of that far future no longer resembles the sky we know. No glowing Milky Way, no constellations to connect into familiar shapes, only sparse, faint points of light, and eventually, almost complete darkness. But this darkness is not frightening. It carries no threat, no danger. It is simply the absence of organized energy, a state in which everything has reached its final balance, where there is no remaining flow of heat to drive complex motion. The feeling that arises when imagining this future is not despair. It is more like a very gentle sadness, like watching a long day come to an end or seeing a familiar season depart without noise. Nothing is taken away suddenly. There is no betrayal by the universe of what it once created. Only a slow dissipation, like warmth gradually spreading into the air until no difference remains to be felt. Strangely, within this fading lies a deep kind of peace. When everything has passed through all its possibilities, all its complex structures, all its forms of life and transformation, returning to simplicity no longer feels like loss. It resembles a very long sleep of the universe itself. Without dreams, without worry, without movement. Just rest after a journey lasting tens of billions of years. And then, at the edge of that silence, humans begin to whisper other questions. Not to deny the quiet, but to listen for whether it is truly the final word. Some ideas suggest that expansion may not be the end, that after the universe has grown cold and sparse, it might enter another phase. Not a reversal of time as we understand it, but a reorganization from entirely new conditions. In these ideas, the ending does not close into a full stop. It curves like an immense circle, where the end of one cycle may become the groundwork for another beginning. Not with the same stars, not with the same detailed laws, but perhaps with the same deep rhythm. The rhythm of emergence, expansion, and settling. Light may have faded here, but elsewhere in a place our current language cannot yet reach. Something else might begin. These ideas are not meant as promises of comfort. They do not say that everything will become good again in familiar ways. They simply open the possibility that silence may not be infinite. And it is precisely this uncertainty that carries its own quiet beauty. The universe does not make guarantees. It does not reveal the ending in advance. It leaves space for imagination and for humility in human understanding. When this story is heard in a state close to sleep, the mind no longer tries to decide what is right or wrong. Scientific models, equations, hypotheses, all dissolve into a single feeling that no tragedy is pre-written. Whether the universe slowly darkens or renews itself in some unknown way, everything unfolds according to laws, without malice, without judgment. The gentle sadness that appears here is not about personal loss, but about the fragility of all things that once shone brightly. And because it is gentle, it does not pull the mind downward. It feels more like a sigh of acceptance than a cry of resistance. And just after that sadness, a thin layer of calm settles in, like night mist spreading across a lake that has already grown still. From this perspective, the end of the universe is no longer something to fear. It is not a catastrophe waiting to happen. It is simply a final state of balance, where there is no tension left, no forced flow, no imbalance needing resolution, a place where every motion has completed its role. For a tired mind, this idea has a curious effect. It dissolves the pressure to keep going, to keep advancing, to keep everything bright. If the universe itself can reach a quiet phase without calling it failure, then a human allowing themselves to stop and sleep becomes entirely reasonable. There is no need to know how the universe will end in order to feel at ease. It is enough to know that everything has its own rhythm, and that rhythm is never in a hurry. Dimming is not punishment. It is simply the final spreading of energy that was once concentrated. And if another beginning ever comes, it will not arise from longing for the past, but because new conditions have quietly matured. As this story spreads through awareness, details begin to blur. Clear images of galaxies fade. Precise notions of tens of billions of years dissolve. What remains is a sense of spaciousness, slow, deep, and wide. a feeling that everything is moving at exactly the right pace, without any need for our intervention. Within that feeling, sleep is no longer a retreat from the world. It becomes an alignment with a vast motion, a movement towards stillness. Like the future universe, the mind gradually darkens, not from fear, but because there is no longer any need to keep shining. And if somewhere, far away, another cycle may one day begin, that is not something to worry about right now. Tonight, in this very small moment, it is enough to know that even the greatest ending imaginable is not tragic. It is simply a long, quiet pause, a deep rest in which everything is allowed to settle, including you. Small, enduring stars. As the distant vision of the universe settles into a broad, quiet peace, when the idea of fading light no longer stirs fear, but feels like the slow breath of time itself, the story gently shifts direction. It does not return to past brilliance, nor does it rush toward vast endings. Instead, it lowers its gaze very softly to look at the small points of light that continue to endure in the dark. Unassuming lamps that never seek attention, yet seem to never grow tired. In a universe where large stars blaze and collapse, where galaxies drift apart and light grows sparse, there are suns so small they are difficult to notice with the naked eye. Their light is dim, deep red, unable to brighten the night sky. They do not trace familiar constellations, do not guide ancient travelers, do not take center stage in grand stories. At a glance, they are easy to overlook. Yet these modest points of light are the most numerous inhabitants of the universe, quietly illuminating the darkness in their own steady rhythm. These small stars are never in a hurry. They do not burn fuel as if afraid time will steal their chance. They consume it slowly, evenly, as though they understood from the beginning that there is nothing to rush toward. In their cores, reactions unfold gently, steadily, without drama. There are no violent flares, no sudden transformations. Only a continuous flow of energy, extending across spans of time far beyond anything humans typically use to measure existence. Their lifespans are not counted in millions or even billions of years, but in numbers that cause the mind to pause. Trillions of years, duration so vast that the birth and death cycles of many other types of stars amount to little more than blinks of an eye. When the universe has grown very old, when large suns have long since faded into memory, these faint points of light will still be there, continuing to shine, weakly, but without interruption. There is something deeply comforting in this image. Not the comfort of victory or glory, but the comfort of continuity. Small stars do not need to impress. They do not need to be seen in order to exist. Their light may never reach human eyes, yet it still travels outward, still doing its quiet work. In a universe that can feel vast and cold, this endurance becomes a profound kind of warmth. Listening to this story in a relaxed state, the mind begins to shift perspective. We are used to assigning meaning to grand events, to moments of brilliance, to forces that reshape everything at once. But the universe, through the silent presence of these small stars, seems to remind us that most of time and space are built from things that go unnoticed. Longevity does not come from burning fiercely in a single moment, but from maintaining a steady rhythm, slow enough not to exhaust itself. These stars do not fight the darkness. They live with it. Their light does not drive the night away. It blends into it, tinting it with a faint red glow. And it is precisely this blending that allows them to endure longer than any brilliant star. They do not try to dominate space. They occupy only a small portion, just enough for themselves, and remain there for a very long time. This metaphor, when it reaches a tired mind, carries no direct instruction. It does not say how one should live. It simply tells a story and allows it to spread on its own. That small does not mean meaningless. That dim light is not lesser light. That being unseen does not make existence any less real. Perhaps that is why, when imagining the far future of the universe, the final image is not absolute darkness, but a very different sky. One where faint red points still glimmer, sparse yet persistent. A sky not bright, not dramatic, but not entirely extinguished. Like a city late at night, long after most have fallen asleep, when only a few small lights remain on, keeping the space from slipping fully into oblivion. For a body preparing to rest, this image has a special lullaby-like quality. It does not excite. It does not quicken the heartbeat. It soothes. It says that one does not need to shine brightly to be present. One does not need to reach extremes to have value. One only needs to continue, bit by bit, at one's own pace. Those small stars do not know they will last so long. They do not plan for trillions of years ahead. They simply do the one thing they can do: transform fuel into light, slowly and steadily. And it is precisely this lack of ambition that becomes their greatest advantage in a universe that unfolds over immense timescales. When human awareness touches this story, pressures to stand out, to achieve quickly, to become something remarkable begin to dissolve. Compared to these enduring stars, moving slowly no longer feels like failure. Existing quietly no longer feels like a flaw. It is simply another kind of orbit, less noticed perhaps, but no less stable. That faint yet lasting light becomes a very soft whisper in the night. That time does not belong only to those who burn brightly. It also belongs to those who know how to keep a flame alive, even if it is small. And in the universe, it is precisely such flames that remain the longest. As the story closes, there is no climax, no heavy conclusion. Only a gentle sense that even in a universe gradually growing quieter, there are still sources of light that do not hurry to fade. And if the universe allows these small stars to endure for so long, then allowing oneself to rest, to live slowly, and to not always be brilliant is entirely reasonable. In this moment, as eyelids grow heavy, the image of a future sky lit by faint red points becomes the final lullaby. It promises nothing grand, asks for no attention. It simply says this: endurance, too, is a form of strength. And sometimes, it is strength enough to walk alongside time for a very long while. Humans are stardust. As the image of small yet enduring points of light continues to hover in the mind, when the feeling that one does not need to be brilliant in order to exist has settled like a deep, steady breath, the story takes one very gentle step further. It does not fly farther into the universe, nor does it turn back toward distant galaxies. This time, it tilts softly inward, as if finally noticing a place that has not yet been fully touched, the body lying here now, listening, breathing, present in this very small moment. There is a scientific truth so simple, it is often overlooked. Yet when viewed through a contemplative lens, it opens an emotional doorway deeper than any cosmic image before it. Everything that makes up a human being, each heartbeat, each breath, each vague thought drifting toward sleep, is composed of elements that were not born on Earth. They have no local origin. They come from very far away, from very long ago, from places where light took millions, even billions of years to depart. The calcium in bones was forged in the cores of massive stars. The iron in blood marked the end of an ancient sun. The carbon in every cell was cooked in immense nuclear furnaces, then cast into space when a star completed its journey. There is not a single new atom in this body. Every one of them once belonged to something else. A star, a cloud of gas, a distant explosion. When this is truly understood, the boundary between us and the universe begins to blur. The body is no longer a separate entity observing the world from the outside. It becomes a natural continuation of the story that has been unfolding from the beginning. The violent collisions, the solitary motions, the cycles of birth and fading, all of these are not just external scenery, but our own direct history, rewritten as flesh, bone, and awareness. The statement that humans are made of star matter is not a romantic metaphor. It is a precise description. Yet where science pauses at precision, reflection begins. For this means that the universe, after billions of years of expansion, dispersal, and reorganization, has produced structures complex enough to look back at itself. In this moment, as a human lies in the dark, listening to a story about the stars, the universe is listening to itself. Through a fragile nervous system, through gentle emotions, through an awareness drifting towards sleep. This thought carries no pride. It does not claim that humans are the center. On the contrary, it places us exactly where we belong. A small, delicate branch growing from a vast process that had no original intention. And precisely because we were not designed for any grand cosmic purpose, our presence becomes softer. There is no burden to fulfill a universal mission, only the permission to exist, to feel, and then to rest. At this point, comfort arises naturally. Not the comfort that everything will be fine, but something deeper, that even when things are not fine, we still belong to a much larger story. Personal worries, failures, and losses, when placed alongside the timescale of stars, are not dismissed, but they are held within a wider frame where they are no longer the whole picture. The body, so often treated as a burden to control, is now seen as a rare artifact of the universe. It is a place where atoms that once wandered through cold space have found a structure stable enough to connect, exchange signals, and generate sensation. Warmth, fatigue, sleepiness, small experiences that never existed through most of cosmic history. Seen this way, the body's need for rest is no longer a sign of weakness. It becomes part of a natural cycle. Stars require millions of years to form and billions to fade. Atoms require extreme collisions to be born. And a complex nervous system like ours requires darkness and sleep to maintain its fragile balance. The sense of connection here is quiet. It brings no excitement. It feels like warm water, slowly spreading through the chest. Hard to name, yet easy to recognize. A feeling that one has not been abandoned in a cold universe. Because this very body is proof that the universe has produced, and is still producing, structures capable of experiencing warmth and peace. In this moment, awareness no longer needs to search for meaning elsewhere. It does not need to explain why it exists. Existence itself is already an extraordinarily rare outcome of countless, improbably precise events. And that is enough. No further task is required tonight. The story of humans as stardust does not end in a dry philosophical conclusion. It simply opens a wide emotional space where smallness no longer means insignificance. A grain of star matter, after billions of years of drifting, has come to wonder about its own origin. To feel comfort in knowing it belongs to something larger, that alone is already something very beautiful. As the mind touches this feeling, rigid boundaries soften. There is no clear inside and outside anymore. No universe as something distant, and no human as something separate. Only a continuous process where matter, energy, and awareness briefly meet in a fragile form, a form breathing evenly in the dark. And in this gentle merging, sleep arrives not as a fall, but as a return to a state with fewer distinctions, fewer thoughts, where awareness settles and gives way to the deep, slow movements of the body. Like a star that, after shining long enough, allows itself to quiet without fear of losing meaning. Somewhere far away, atoms continue their journeys. Here, in this quiet room, they have temporarily gathered into a human being at rest. And in this brief moment, the universe has managed to feel itself, not through light or gravity, but through the deep comfort of simply existing, even if only within a peaceful sleep. Lullaby and closing, as the feeling of deep connection with the universe still rests warmly in the chest, as the understanding that this body is a very natural part of a story stretching across billions of years has gently settled. There is no longer any need to move forward. Not because the story is ended, but because it no longer needs to be told in words. At this point, language begins to feel unnecessary. The thoughts once supported by science, by images of stars, by a deep sense of comfort, can now be softly set down. The universe does not ask to be remembered. It does not demand to be understood. It does not wait for any conclusion to be reached before the night closes. The atoms that once burned in stellar cores, once drifted through cold space, once gathered into this body, do not need to be named again. They have fulfilled their role simply by being here, and now they too allow themselves to rest. Attention gradually moves away from vast concepts. It no longer reaches outward toward the deep sky, nor does it turn inward to analyze emotion. It slowly, naturally narrows, like the last light of day withdrawing from a room. Details soften. Words no longer need to be followed. What remains is a simple sense of presence, faint, light, barely defined. Breath, which has been here from the beginning without ever needing to be noticed, becomes the final anchor. Not to control, not to improve, only to recognize. Air flows in, air flows out. The chest rises, the chest falls. A steady, repeating movement that requires no thought, like the ancient rhythms of the universe itself, present long before awareness existed and continuing even after awareness begins to fade. There's no information left to hold. Images of stars, of endless time, of birth and fading can dissolve like mist. If anything remains, it is not knowledge, but feeling. The feeling that nothing more needs to be done, that nothing is waiting to be resolved in this moment. The body understands this before the mind does. It begins to release small tensions unnoticed during the day. The jaw unclenches, the shoulders lower slightly, the forehead smooths. Deep regions of the nervous system, always alert, receive the signal that there is no danger to attend to. Tonight is safe. This moment is calm enough. Sleep is not summoned. It does not need an invitation. It only needs permission. And when nothing is trying to hold on anymore, that permission naturally appears. Like a door that was never locked, only blocked. Awareness begins to dissolve, not by falling or vanishing suddenly, but like color slowly fading from an old painting. Thoughts thin out, the spaces between them stretch, and eventually, even noticing those spaces is no longer necessary. What remains is a very faint state, where there are no questions and no answers. In this state, there is no longer a you listening to a story, and no longer a universe being observed. only a slow, deep process where boundaries no longer matter. Like waves returning to the sea, without needing to decide what is wave and what is water. There is no farewell, no formal closing line. Because night does not end with a period. It simply continues until another light appears, and even that does not need to be thought about now. All that remains is gentle dissolving, of attention, of tension, of the need to understand. Breath continues, slow and even. The body continues doing what it has learned over millions of years of evolution. Rest when possible. Recover in silence. And the universe, in its own way, is doing the same. Expanding, settling, unhurried. If anything is carried into sleep, it is not a message, but a very soft feeling. That everything is okay in the deepest sense of the word. No proof is needed, no confirmation required. Just a peaceful acceptance that this moment is allowed to pass without being held. And then, even that feeling fades, like a distant star, too faint to distinguish from the night. Not gone, just blended in. There is nothing more to say, nothing more to remember, only sleep arriving when it arrives, in its own way. Slow, gentle, and completely natural.